Hello, my name's Andy Connell and you're watching a screencast on test design techniques. Specifically, we're going to be looking at how to organize the tests which need to be performed. There's going to be quite a lot of emphasis on the meaning of individual words, and there are three terms which I want to look at. First off, there's the idea of test conditions, and these really specify what it is that's going to be tested. Secondly, we have the test cases. These are the data, perhaps the expected outcomes and what is to be done for an individual test. And then finally we've got the test procedure. Test procedure is like the script. It is the sequence in which the tests must be performed and any preconditions or environmental conditions which must be in place prior to the start of testing. So looking at these in more detail, first off the test condition. So say it's really trying to describe the thing that's going to be tested. That can be any number of things, perhaps an individual function, perhaps the performance of a system, perhaps some kind of security feature. Typically it would only represent a relatively small part of the overall system. I've got an example here, for instance perhaps on an input customer form. The test condition would describe the testing required for the name and title fields on such a form. From here, let's go and think about the test case. As I said, the test case is really the individual data which is going to be used to prove the particular point which it needs to be established to ensure that the system is fit for purpose. Here we've got a table of various types of test, and we can see that it breaks down into a test number, the test description, the data itself, what the user must do in order to perform the test, and what you expect the outcome to be. The final thing we looked at was the test procedure, and another word for test procedure is the test script. It's a description of how to run the test cases. So to think about perhaps another kind of example, we might think about a navigation example. So the person must perhaps navigate to the input customer form, perform the tests which we've just seen, tab the surname, and finally select new customer. So it's a sequence of actions which the user must perform. So we've got this idea of test conditions. The thing we're trying to test is made up of many test cases, and we've got this thing called a test script or a test procedure, which will give the descriptions of how the sequence of test cases are run and perhaps environmental conditions needed to run those test cases. Put everything together and what we have is a test execution schedule. The test execution schedule is the amalgamation of all the individual test scripts put together in the form of a timetable. There will be certain important scripts which need to be run first. There will be other scripts which will need to be run in order to set up various dependencies. For instance, you perhaps can't place an order against a customer until the customer has been registered. So that would be an example perhaps of sequence. One of the most important things that the test analyst must do is understand how much testing is actually required. We've seen in the earlier slide that we can't test everything, so it's going to have to be a subset of everything. We want to focus those tests. We don't want a sort of duplication. We don't want to, given the fact that we can't test everything, we certainly don't want to test one thing any more than once. We need to get some kind of estimate about how much has been covered, how much more testing we've got to go before we complete, and so therefore we need this ability to measure how much has been done and against how much needs to be done. So just to re-emphasize the point, we can't test everything, but we must test enough to give confidence that the system is fit for purpose. So the purpose of testing is really to make sure that the program performs to specification. We looked in the earlier screencast at the idea of the V model. So we have program specifications and system specifications. They say how the thing should work. What we're really doing is making sure that the program gives us this and nothing more. No unexpected outcomes. We don't want it to be performing to specification and some. We just need the thing performing to specification. Testing for negatives is always very difficult. Trying to prove a negative thing, trying to prove that something won't happen is remarkably difficult. For any system of any decent level of complexity, it's easy to drown in the tests, which perhaps is why we've been spending a lot of time with this different testing nomenclature in terms of the different words used to describe the different aspects of the test execution process. Our objective is always to create the smallest number of tests which will prove the system is fit for purpose. Finally, to reiterate something which we touched on in the earlier screencast, and that is the nature of different types of test case. First off, we have the idea of black box testing. Black box testing is specification-based testing, as I've just said in the previous slide, proving that the system works to spec. There are other sources for design, for instance white box testing, which is sometimes called structural testing. This is where we look at things like standards, we look at all the code is employed under some kind of circumstance. It's technical testing. The third and final type of testing is experience-based testing. This is where the test cases reflect the experience perhaps of users or professional testers, so that when we think about what the test condition that is being tested is, it's coming from people's background of past successes and failures. Thank you for listening. That concludes the slideshow.